So anyone who knows me knows that I really like paper clay. I did a whole video about it, trying different clays out, and honestly, paper clay just was the best fit for me and my process. So I told myself that I wanted to make my own paper clay, play with different recipes, all of that jazz. If you're new here, I'm UB, and thank you so much for coming along. If you stick around to the end of the video, you get experience points, which is pretty cool. The last couple of episodes, I kind of looked like the corpse bride, so thanks for sticking with me. Color correction can only help so much. I'm out here trying to find my personal style, and it's a journey. For those uninitiated, paper clay is basically not a clay. It's a paste-like paper mache mixture, and there's a lot of different recipes out on the internet for said mixture. We're going to dive in today. The first thing I did is I went online to see what other creators have figured out before me. No need to reinvent the wheel. I have to play with the different ingredients to see what sort of pH actually makes sense. I think I personally want to avoid using flour. I think I want to use more like all-purpose glue. We'll see how I feel about that when we're mixing things together, but one thing that I know I want to do is add a couple drops of hydrogen peroxide. Some people said that stops it from getting a smell to it as it rots. I don't see that hurting the mixture any, and I'm going to probably just go ahead with that. I saw one very popular blog that said to add mineral oil to the mixture so that it has a clay-like texture in your hands. That might be what creative paper clay does because it is a very silky mixture. They could also just be grinding the paper down to really fine fibers. I'll have to play with it. Glue and joint compound are pretty common ingredients in this. I bought a dry joint compound, which doesn't seem to be what the other creators I was looking at were using, but maybe that joint compound that's dry will absorb the water that the flour in the original paper mache recipe is meant to do. Just like the hydrogen peroxide, adding a pinch of salt helps to not let it mold. I don't know if mold is going to be a problem considering I don't want to use flour, but it's worth playing with for sure, and I don't think salt is going to hurt the mixture any. Something that I did find fascinating is that a couple of artists were talking about using acid-free paper. They were trying to make sculptures that were archival, which for those who aren't in the art world, archival pieces are meant to last eons, basically. Acid-free paper tends to be the preferred fix for those sorts of issues, so it makes sense that people were thinking that an acid-free paper would make the paper mache last longer. There were discussions as to how to take regular paper and make it acid-free, but I think I'm just going to buy some acid-free paper from Michaels and see what the difference is between acid-free paper, newspaper, and printer paper. Part of the reason that I didn't tackle this project earlier is that I did not have a blender that was good for use in my workshop. What I did is I went on the buy nothing, sell nothing group for my area, and somebody was sweet enough to give me an old beat up blender that I can put in my workshop. All right, with that being said, let's go find some acid-free paper and I'll meet you guys back here. Oh, this? Yeah, I spontaneously decided to sacrifice some blood to an unknown god via a black olive can. So that's how my lunch went.
How much more of this do you need?
I'm good.
Anyway, I digress. So what we've got here is paper from Michaels. This is the archival quality, low acid, low lignin, regular printer paper. These are scraps. And then I've got regular old newspaper. So we're going to give each of these a try with the same concoction of paper mache materials. Like I said, we're not gonna do flour. I think we're just going to do glue, which I have to find in my stash here real quick. I've got baking soda, which is supposed to even out the pH of your mixture. So papers like this that have acid in them, this will counteract that acid. As far as equipment goes, I have my blender ready to go, and I've got a paper shredder because I think it's going to be most advisable to get these pieces into very little confettis and then blend them. I'll also be adding water as needed, so with that being said, let's dive in. Let's get these ready to go. Labels are my friends. All right, so I went off to clean the blender and I put the lid on this guy so that he wouldn't lose his moisture, but I'm realizing that there's condensation in here, which means that the heat from the blender is definitely creating heat in here. So I'm just gonna drop him outside to cool down without his lid, and we'll come back to the newspaper here in a few minutes. I find it funny how I'm trying to dress up for my videos and give you guys my best self, and we started this video looking like I was ready to go on an adventure, and we are now ending this video with a band-aid on my finger, just getting comfy because sometimes adventures just end that way. I think I'm gonna start with the joint compound and see how that changes the texture and if it kind of soaks up a lot of that excess moisture that I'm seeing. All right, taking a look at what we're working with here now that I've mixed up joint compound with the copy paper and the no acid paper, or acid-free paper, as you may say. I'm starting to wonder if the mineral oil that was in some of those recipes is supposed to help with the material not sticking to your surface as much, because this is very gunked up. Creative paper clay, when it gets wet, will do sort of the same thing where it'll get stuck to the mat, but when it's dry, it doesn't do that as much. So part of me wonders if the mineral oil is partially for a silkier feel and partially so that it's not as sticky on your mat or what have you that you're sculpting on, but that remains to be seen. I definitely had more joint compound compared to paper slurry in the no acid paper, and that has kind of gotten a better texture here. It's a lot less goopy, but it is still kind of difficult to work with compared to creative paper clay. So we're going to let both of these dry out a little bit. This one is drying out a little bit as we speak, and we'll see if that sort of diminishes their ability to be sculpted or not, because that joint compound might just get hard. I'm not really sure. All right, one last thing to test is mineral oil. So let's see what this is like. I think I want to put down something protective here. This will either do the trick or be a terrible mistake. I'm gonna take just a little chunk off of each of these balls. Oh. Our first one has already started to harden up, so I'm gonna throw a lid on that. So let's take a look. We've got newspaper, no acid. Our first one, which is copy paper. Is this open? Absolutely not. Just a teeny dab. That's what we're gonna start with and go from there. Okay. This does give it a much more luxurious texture, and I'll be curious to see if it continues to dry out really fast. It's got a very nice texture. It balls up just like the creative paper clay when it's wet. I mean, that's a home run to me. That's awesome. It's not sticking to any of my surfaces, really. It's got the same sticky factor as the creative paper clay, so that's awesome. Let's see about this slightly wetter acid-free paper that's supposed to be more archival and last longer. Interesting. This is getting the same kind of effect, it's just wetter. We'll see how that dries out. And then newspaper. There we go. Newspaper. This is losing little bits, which makes me think it's probably drying out, or I just mixed it poorly, which based on the color, that's probably true. But with the mineral oil in there, it actually does have a very nice velvety texture as well. And it's doing kind of the same thing as the first one. This guy I didn't really test. Kind of the same vibe though. Maybe I'll put these in a mold real quick.
to 6 more days later.
I realized that it was almost Valentine's Day and I poured all of my effort into making little valentines. I'll just put them up on the screen because this is not in focus for you guys. That's the sort of thing that you can expect on my Patreon. The little versions of these are Patreon exclusive, so if you're interested in that, $5 a month, it's a really good deal. Let's take a look at what the clays have actually done. And I did pop in here and there to kind of make notes for myself. So what we're gonna do is start with the creative paper clay here. This is a great spot to show it off. Yep. Feeling like a beauty blogger right here. That's the idea. They're both hardened completely, and that's about what I expect from creative paper clay. As you can see, it's got a very smooth surface, and on the back, a very similarly smooth surface, except for the fact that I did not smooth it out super well with my fingers. That is our control, basically. Moving on to copy paper. I should really make this taller. Copy paper. This looks somewhat similar, honestly. I can tell that the fibers in the clay are a little bit bigger than creative paper clay, just based off of the smoothness of the surfaces here. And I'll kind of show that off in the up close camera. But you can see that there's a little bit more texture to the surface of this one, whereas with the creative paper clay, it's a lot smoother. It hugged the edges of the silicone mold a lot better, and that might be something that I just have to keep in mind for future projects, is if I want to make things out of a mold, the actual name brand paper clay is probably the best way to go. The copy paper took the longest to dry, and it took about 48 hours to completely solidify. With that being said, it looks very similar to the creative paper clay, so that's cool. On to the acid-free paper. This is actually kind of fascinating to me that it's very textured compared to even just the copy paper. Look at that. And part of that might be the quickness of my molding. I know that there's definitely like it's a little bit bent, and that's because I unmolded it poorly, and I kind of figured when I was taking this out and playing with it that it probably would end up with more texture because the fibers in this are just so much bigger than even the copy paper. At the same time, if you're worried about your sculptures lasting over time, then this is probably your safe bet, but I will do some testing in the future to kind of see if that is something that you need to invest in. And here in my notes, I have that the acid-free paper unmolded really poorly. If I remember right, it was kind of sticking to the silicone mold, and I was washing the mold in between each clay, so that's unfortunate. Lastly, we have the newspaper, and I find this one fascinating because it's actually got quite a nice texture to it, and I want to put it up against the creative paper clay here. Maybe the camera can see it. Maybe it can't. I'm definitely able to see the fibers in the newspaper, but it's very smooth, even compared to the creative paper clay. The creative paper clay definitely wins as far as smoothness on the side that was touching the silicone mold, and I think this is the right move if you're going to be silicone molding pieces. As far as the different types of paper that we tested here, I'm actually very optimistic about the newspaper because I feel like we got the smallest fibers out of it, and if I had been able to run the blender as long as I had wanted to with this one, I think we would have gotten an even better texture, but the blender that I got started to overheat. That's why it had some heat going on inside the container. At this point, you can probably tell that I'm very partial to the copy paper or the newspaper. The acid-free paper didn't turn out the way that I had hoped, and supposedly, according to the research that we did, the newspaper and copy paper should be lowered acid levels because we added the baking soda in. So it's very possible that all of these will withstand the elements similarly, but what I'm going to do is put these out in my garden come spring and update you guys on the resilience of each one one when the fall comes again. So it's going to be a while before we get an update on this. So what have we learned here? First of all, I'm going to put the recipe for the paper clay that I made down in the description. You can sub out whatever kind of paper you want to play with. Scandalous. Anyway, please let me know in the comments if you have anything that you learn when you're playing with this stuff. The other thing I want to talk about is I actually looked at the little containers that I mixed all of these test batches in, essentially, and the only one that dried out completely is the acid-free paper. This might be that my ratio of joint compound to slurry was off, but I think it's just another reason to dislike the acid-free paper. I don't know. Secondly, these two stayed perfectly moist, and just treat it like any other air dry clay. Keep it in an airtight sealed container, such as a food container that you've washed out, and keep a little piece of wet sponge or wet paper towel in here so that it stays moist. With that being said, now that I know how to make my own paper clay, I think I can make some really big, really cool projects. And this was one of the first steps that I needed to do in order to start working on the free little library stump. So part 2 will be coming eventually. I've got it on my schedule. It's just a matter of doing the project, getting the footage, having fun. Thank you so much for coming on this journey with me. I really enjoyed getting to play with the different types of paper and all that good stuff. I highly recommend newspaper for anybody that's just sculpting as a hobby. Copy paper also works well. It's just a little bit bigger fibers. And honestly, we're a little bit inconclusive as far as the acid-free paper goes, because I know that acid-free paper comes in different weights and all that good stuff. This was a cardstock paper, which is partially why the fibers are a lot bigger in it, but I'll be curious to play with it and update you guys in a later video. Thank you so much for getting this far in the video. Here's 1,000 experience points. You're a rock star, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you like the video. All that good stuff. It really helps me out, and I am a small channel just trying to get my legs on YouTube. Thank you so much to my patrons, Mark, Nathaniel, Twyla, and Liam. You guys are rock stars. If you want to join them and get some exclusive freebies and early access to my videos and all of that good stuff, go to patreon.com/ubdraws. Thank you so much again. Don't forget to drink some water. Have a good day, and I'll see you next time. Peace.